All right, cool. So I'm here with Dave Collins. Is it okay if I call you Dave?
It's absolutely fine. I've been called worse.
Yeah, I've seen your some of the Twitter battles that you've been in. So
Oh Lord.
I'm assuming that you've probably been called much worse.
Oh, well, as I say, it's an occupational hazard, Josh. That it certainly hasn't forwarded my career. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it seems like it gets kind of wild on Twitter and LinkedIn with some of these discussions.
I think people get very evangelical about their views,
Yeah.
and they. I've never tried to be aggressive, but I've certainly been. Are you sure? That constructs, and I'll always point stuff out and give them evidence. No, don't want to know. But
Yeah.
hey, it keeps me off the streets.
Well, something's got it, right? All right. So just for the people who are viewing, we're talking about, that first part was a little bit about skill acquisition talks on social
Mhm.
media. I am talking to Dave Collins. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself real quick, just for people who might not be familiar?
For sure. Yeah, my name's Dave Collins. I'm a professor at Edinburgh University and also at Dublin City University. I run my own company called Grey Matters Performance Limited. Grey Matter brain, but also Grey Matters ash blonde hairstyle. In martial arts wise, I've had the pleasure of training in judo, bit of jiu-jitsu. I'm a fifth dan karate, second dan judo. Done a lot of work as an applied performance psychologist, including judo teams and other stuff. And it's a pleasure to be talking to you, Josh.
It's good to talk to you too. And, um, just because you and I haven't spoken before, I'm a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu instructor. I've been training for about 21 years, coaching for about 18 years.
Hmm.
I have my own school in Philadelphia, and that's basically all there is to me: cats, Jiu Jitsu, chicken nuggets, coffee. Um, so, basically, Dave, originally, I think the first time I made contact with you was I commented on a paper that you wrote about skateboarding and like the sort of the learning culture in skateboarding. And I thought it was so interesting because I've also I grew up skateboarding on and off since like 1989, and I still skateboard. And because I have an interest in the skill acquisition stuff, and I also grew up skateboarding, I thought it was really cool to see those two worlds intersect in your paper.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
The thing with skateboarding, Josh, the reason we went and looked at it, actually, some work I did with my daughter for her PhD, and it fascinated me because at the time, this is pre-Olympic, there weren't formal, there wasn't a formal coaching setup. But even though there wasn't a formal coaching setup, people coached each other. So
Hmm.
they and my point was the role of a coach is important, and it's important for learners. And if there isn't one, people will invent one. And I've done not much stuff in skateboarding, and I'm so clumsy. You would not want to be anywhere near me, Josh. I'm useless. But I've done a lot of work in free skiing, snowboarding, bit of work. So I've sort of seen how it works, and it was just so interesting to me. I loved and continue to love the atmosphere around a skate park,
Hmm.
around a half pipe, because people are so supportive of each other and they're so positive with each other. You see someone do something, everybody claps. It's brilliant, absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant. But the whole point of going to look at skateboarding was to say, if you have an environment without coaches, what happens? And we
Yeah.
weren't surprised to find, well, gosh, someone else coaches, and you peer coach, and that works fine. Works fine.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because with skateboarding, you mentioned that you've done some Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as well.
Yeah. I mean, we used to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Actually, we did. I had a Japanese judo master at one stage who taught Goshin So we did a type of jutsu, but my groundwork was pretty rubbish. So I went and said, okay, I'll work with these guys, and certainly I've had the pleasure of working with some very high achiever judoka, and
Very cool.
we've always gone to BJJ for groundwork to
Yeah.
push it.
Yeah, and us for for takedowns, we do a lot of judo and a lot of wrestling, and there's a lot of
Mm,
like cross pollination in those communities, I think.
for
And
sure. I mean, I was at Penn State University. I did my masters there, and then I was faculty there as well.
oh,
And
okay,
and I just looking at the. I mean, wrestling, judo, boxing. There's no hiding place, and the
no,
boys they're just fit as fleas. I mean, we
yeah,
used to run the stadium. Used to go to the Nittany Lions and run up and down the steps. Bloody wrestlers were hopping up and down the steps.
yeah, right. Like a lot of the steps
They're
too,
just
right?
mad. Yeah, they're just mad.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because what you said about skateboarders not really having clear coaching, and then kind of like you go to a skate park and they kind of are helping each other out, and the older skaters are giving advice to the younger skaters. In some ways that's very similar to sometimes what happens in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, where like there's almost always somebody who owns a gym or owns a school, and there's like a head instructor, but then there's also open mats, which are just the
Hmm,
open training time after class.
yeah,
And
sure.
what ends up happening is a lot of people do a lot of their development during open mat time where they're
Hmm,
sparring with their friends, but then some of the older, more experienced students might help give them advice or be like, oh, here, I tried to do this throw and you based out like this. So then I grabbed your knee and did a knee tap.
yeah,
And so there's a
yeah.
lot of those like sort of informal coaching structures that happen during open mat, which again is very similar to the points that you were making about skateboarding.
It's my experience in martial arts in general, Josh, and certainly my sensei has a very traditional Japanese approach to our karate, and our black belt night is not for the faint-hearted, but there's certainly a good deal of reciprocation, and that's great. The fascinating thing for me there is because you've got a lot of people saying a lot of different things about
Yeah.
skill acquisition. And some, as I've said before, are quite evangelical about it. No, this is the way. Now, for me, I don't see the way. I see lots of ways. And
It
these
depends.
ways are, yeah, thank you. It depends it depends will be written on my gravestone. And I know lots of people will come to water my grave, hopefully not true naturally. But anyway, so from an it depends point of view, there are so many different contexts, Josh, and there are so many different things that people are learning
Mhm.
that it just makes good sense to me. But it also is something that we've researched strongly, and it still works. Is that there are a variety of different styles, and so a very cognitive style might be good for this. A very ecological style might be really good for that, and then the new things that are coming out. Maybe we can talk about that in a bit about predictive processing, which is
Yeah.
fascinating and really important for martial arts. So all of a sudden, there isn't one way. There are lots of ways, and and what that means is that part of the responsibility of the coach or the person who is coaching is to make good decisions. We call it professional judgment and decision making, PJDM. And you as a coach, Josh, whether you're coaching a bunch of kid beginners or you're coaching, guys who are, black belt whatevers, it doesn't matter. You make good choices as to what these individuals need at this particular time, and that's
Yeah.
that's the crack. That's where this thing starts to kick in for the instructor, the coach, the teacher, whatever you call, the person in charge.
Yeah. And that brings me to your book, Skill Acquisition, that you wrote with Dr. Jamie Taylor.
That's right.
Yeah.
We,
And
we actually it's an edited text, so you'll find there's a whole there's deliberately we chose colleagues, and we chose colleagues not because they agree with us, but we chose colleagues because we know their work. Yeah, and everybody in that book is a coach and an academic. We call them pracademics.
yeah.
We didn't invent the term, but we like it, and it means that the answers we're coming up with, the suggestions we're coming up with, make academic sense, research sense, but they make real life sense as well.
Yeah.
And that's the crack. You've got to have both.
Yeah. It seems like there's like sometimes maybe, I see this not just in, sport and martial art, but I think in general, I sometimes see that there is a big gap between theoretical understanding of something and then a practical understanding of something, where
You're right.
it's not
You're
always the
absolutely
case, but
right.
there's, yeah,
Well, I don't think it should be, but I think you're right. It is. But the other thing is not only that sometimes they're too far apart, but the other thing is that the passage of knowledge is only one way. So it's almost like the academic going, "Well, I know and you don't, so pay attention," and
yeah,
that's silly because good work is two way. So I mean, I did my PhD in electroencephalography, so I wired up brains. So some of the people I worked with had to get some really strong amplifiers, but we wired up brains. We started looking at karateka in terms of breaking, and in terms
Mhm.
of kata, and in terms of what they did. And there's an awful lot of the ancient, in this case Japanese, wisdom. Mushin no mushin. Take as your thought the thought of no thought. And it just echoes straight the way through. You can measure it, you can see it, you can coach like it, it works well. So, when you have a more recent arrival, but the crack about martial arts, of course, is it's it's the acid test is pretty strong. If it doesn't
yeah,
work, you're going to find out.
yeah. It's
And I'm
if you're
sure
doing
you and
any
I have
kind
got the
of,
scars.
yeah, I've found out the hard way a lot of times when my ideas don't work out.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah,
that's the point. So what you're looking at is you're looking at a situation where ideally theory feeds practice, practice feeds theory, people work. Honestly, I think good coaches are good experimenters. There's a guy
yeah,
called Schoen who's done all the work in reflection. And Schoen talks about the reflective practitioner as an experimenter. You try stuff out. Now I've worked across a number of sports. I see some very high achieving and highly successful, but bright coaches, and they'll literally experiment. I can recall one guy. He's coached lots of Olympic medalists in athletics. He'll always have some other people in the group that he can try stuff out on, and he's
yeah.
very open about it, very honest about it. And so there's a lot of sense because otherwise you stand still, and if you stand still in sport, you go backwards.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Your that point that you just made about being honest about it. I think like I've done a lot of experimenting in coaching over the years, and there have been times where there's an idea and I kind of fall in love with the idea. And when I do the experiment on the mat and teaching, and then it's almost like the idea captures me so much that I can't really see clearly if it's a
Mm.
good idea or a bad idea. And this is sort of like when I've fallen for certain trends in, like when a new book comes out, like the talent equation or something, and there's like, the deliberate practice thing, and then game plan, like the different sort of
Mm.
ideas that capture our fancy. And sometimes the idea is just sounds so good and it's so appealing and it clicks with me as a person so much that it's hard
Yeah.
to see clearly as a coach, like, okay, I love the idea, but it's not a good idea. It's not
We talk,
working,
yeah, we
you
talk
know?
about ideas being sticky,
Yeah.
and there's and I'm going to say there's lots of other things that are sticky and they're not so palatable, but never mind. But I was speaking earlier this evening to an young athlete I'm working with, and she's 17. She's really upwardly mobile, tremendously gifted.
Okay.
She's just done a week at the Red Bull Centre,
Okay.
and she's enthused. It's like, look at this, look at that, look at that, And then I've said to her, this is great. Now, what you need to do is now you need to be the captain of your ship. You need to be really, really critical. So
Yeah.
if someone at the Red Bull Centre says, now you should eat cream cakes, you don't go, well, that's nonsense. You go, oh, really? Why is that? Thank you. And then you go over here and you ask your nutritionist, they said I should eat cream cakes. What do you think? Well, and then you ask someone else, and then you ask someone else. Have you heard of Carl Sagan?
Yeah.
So Carl Sagan, I mean, clearly a superb scientist, but he talked about a credulous, skeptical approach,
Okay.
whereby it's not that you're rude. So that's bloody rubbish, isn't it? You just go, oh, really? Why is that? Now, I want people to be credulous, skeptical with anything I say. I mean, why trust me? I'm a dodgy bloke from Essex. Why would they believe me? So ask me why, and then test it against the other things. So if that's what you do, then Josh, what happens is you start to get a very mechanistic view.
Right. How
So
does it work?
how does that work? My sensei will, you do this, this, this. Yeah, why is that sensei? Because do. Now, if you did this would happen.
Hmm.
Okay, fine. And he's such a deep thinker, but he's always willing to be able to go, and then sometimes you'll say something to him, rarely, you say something to him, oh, well, this. And he'll go, oh, never thought of that. That's a good idea. And if we move forwards like that, and therefore the idea of everybody being credulous, skeptical, and asking questions, absolutely fine. And that doesn't matter whether they're 5 or 25 or 55.
So it's interesting because this reminds me of your book a little bit, where, like, so something like ecological dynamics is becoming more popular in Brazilian jiu-jitsu right now. And so, and I've had a couple interviews with people who are big proponents of ecological dynamics. And I'm not academically educated in any of this stuff. I have a lot of experience as a coach, but I didn't go to any kind of schooling for skill acquisition or much of anything else. So when I talk to these guys, I can say, like, okay, this sounds good, and some of this resonates with my experience as a coach, and some of it doesn't. And the parts that I don't understand, how does that work? And then I can get an answer for them and say, oh, well, perception is direct, and this is, you'll self-organize in this situation. And so when I ask for the mechanics behind how this might work, I hit an educational wall because I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not, or how strong the evidence is of what they're actually saying. So for example, if I'm told that, if I have people play a certain type of game, and then they should have some sort of skill emerge from the playing of that game based on the constraints. And I ask, how does that work? And they tell me, okay, well, according to dynamical systems theory, if you structure things this way, then things should emerge in this kind of pattern. And then I say, okay, well, I haven't seen that happen all the time. So how does that work? And when they tell me that there's evidence in the form of scientific studies of this showing up, and I say, well, okay, but I don't know how to read a study. I'm not scientifically literate. So how do I know
Okay.
how strong that study is or how weak the study is?
Okay. Right. I can give you an opinion,
Okay.
and you will certainly find as many people who want to disagree with my opinion as people who want to whittle on my gravestone. So we go where we go. Ecological dynamics is brilliant for some things.
Okay.
There is no way on earth that the old idea of indirect perception works. So the old idea was that your brain would take a picture, do a calculation, take another picture, take a calculation, take another picture. Now, if I'm throwing a punch at you, and your brain's having to calculate, nonsense. So the idea of direct perception, okay, works great. And it's very, very I was going to say inbred, but it's very in-house. So you get a baby, and the baby will do what's called looming. So as something comes towards you, you'll go, whoa. and the baby will go, what the, what
Yeah.
the, right? Okay, so that's pretty normal behaviour. It's hardwired,
Yeah.
and it's direct perception. And of course they're right. Of course they're right. Yeah. My favourite trick is you get on. We call them escalators or travelators. What do you call them? Moving walkways. Like you go to the airport. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like escalator. If it goes up, it's an
Yeah.
escalator.
Yeah.
If it
Okay.
stays
Well,
flat,
whatever.
it's whatever.
When
Yeah.
you step onto it, you automatically take a longer step, right?
Yeah.
And when you step off it, you automatically take a shorter step, and that's sort of inbuilt. You just do that. And if you don't believe me, the next time you get on one, take note, and you'll take a longer step on and a shorter step off.
Yeah.
And the silly thing is, even if the bloody thing's not moving, you'll still take a longer step on and a
Oh,
shorter step off.
interesting.
Because it's like it's hardwired almost. So that's
Right.
fine. And I'm absolutely great with that. But how do I take the baby who's looming and teach them that actually you counter, you step into it, you fight the angle. Might yeah, you fight the angle. How
If
do you coach that?
if somebody's throwing a punch at a baby, right?
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, we won't go there. I mean, that's normal. That's normal child rearing practice in England, but not necessarily. No, 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 no.
Nah.
But it is. It is. It's how you. But this is the point. So there are lots of things that it works for,
Yeah.
but there are also lots of things that it doesn't. So
Okay.
we've done studies where we've done an ecological approach and the constraints-led approach, and we've done traditional teaching, and traditional teaching works much better for younger ages. As they get older and they've got some vocabulary, if you will, some movement vocabulary, then they can discover. Yeah,
Okay.
and that's fine. So what you're saying is this approach works great here, this approach works better here. Now, um, one other example, is that okay? Don't want to talk
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
much.
Go
Is that
for
all
it.
right? Okay. So there's some work from a guy called Musa Moston, and he looked at teaching physical education, and he had us teaching styles spectrum, and at one end was a command style. You do this, now do this, now do this, demonstrate, now da 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 da. And at the other end was a guided discovery or a free discovery method. And there's all these different things in between. And we talk about this in the book. And one of these styles wasn't better than another, they were just more appropriate. So if I'm teaching rappelling, I think you guys call it,
Yeah.
yeah? And
Like
I
where you go
teach
down the rock
rappelling
or whatever.
on the nosy, and I teach rappelling by free guided discovery,
Okay.
that's a bit of a beggar. I'm going to have lots of paperwork because I'm going to have lots of accidents, right?
Yeah.
So you teach rappelling by command style. Do it like this. You want to go down, you do this. You want to go up, you do this. Da, da, da. If I'm teaching a dance class, yeah, which thank the Lord I don't do much, all right? But imagine I'm teaching a dance class, then
Yeah.
guided discovery is perfect. Command style would be nonsense. So it depends. Here's a variety of different styles. What's this style good for? What's this style good for? And I
Yeah.
can't for the life of me see that we know enough about skill acquisition to say one method is always right, because it isn't. And if you were to look across the papers, you can, trust me, I'm a doctor. You can look across all these papers and the evidence is like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes this works better, sometimes this works better. In this context, this seems to work. In this context, that seems to work. And I'm comfy with that. I'm very comfortable that constraints-led approach. It used to be called conditioned games when I was a kid, but but that there it was. It was in it's in the first coaching book of soccer ever, written by a guy called Walter Winterbottom in 1952. Yeah,
Okay.
just before I was born. And they talk about conditioned games. Now they talk about constraints. It doesn't matter. There's not much new, but the way you solve it is you think about how does that work. So your question is very, very good, and also another important question: where doesn't it work?
Yeah.
So you're advising I do this. Where doesn't that work?
But also, I guess if the answer to how does it work is inaccessible, like if you tell me that something works this way, but I don't have the educational background to know whether this is accurate or not, or whether there's like another perspective, like maybe you tell me that direct perception works like this and that there's studies that support this. And I go, okay, well, he's a doctor. He knows what he's talking about. But then I talk to somebody else and they say something different and say,
No,
you know what? Maybe it
no,
doesn't work like that.
don't trust me. I'm a doctor argument. Not
Yeah.
at
I mean, I
all.
usually
Yeah,
don't, but it's,
yeah.
but I can see
Mate,
like,
I've been an academic for years and years, and I know enough that I don't confuse qualification with intelligence.
Yeah.
But you see, have you heard of Richard Feynman?
Yeah.
Double laureate physicist, one of my heroes. Yeah,
Mhm.
and he used to say, if a theory isn't simple enough, isn't sufficiently simple to explain to an undergraduate, it's not a good theory. Now, there was a guy called Ernest Rutherford who was a British physicist in the 1930s. He said it the same thing, but he said it much less politically correctly. He said, if you can't explain a theory to a barmaid, it's not a good theory.
Yeah.
So sorry, ladies, but anyway. But the point is, make everything as simple as you can, but no simpler. And
Yeah.
if I can't explain it to you without some highfalutin terms, you know, I mean, I love physics. If I hadn't been in the military, I was going to read astrophysics. But you try, even the most complex ideas of particle physics, people can explain it in ways that people understand. So why can't they do that with how this bloody thing works?
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Because my job as a scientist, as an educator, is to make things as simple as they can be, but no simpler, without inventing new words and as much as possible measuring it.
Gotcha.
So that's why my doctorate's in brainwaves, because I like the measure.
Okay. So you mentioned a little bit about predictive processing earlier.
Oh yes, yeah.
So like, if we're so going back to your book, you basically talk about three different
Yeah.
theoretical backgrounds: information processing or cognitive approaches, ecological dynamics approaches, and then predictive processing or active inference, which are different but similar.
Yes.
And then, one thing that strikes me as interesting is, so you have these different approaches, and constraints-led approach is really sort of tied in strongly with an ecological dynamics approach, but it seems like this is more of a tool than anything else. And so if you take a constraints-led approach, what would that look like if you applied it to an information processing theoretical framework
Well, you
or
see,
to a
I think it has been done. I think
Yeah,
that's been done for years and years, and it's just called a conditioned game.
yeah,
So if I say, I don't know, if I say, right, I want to play this game, I've made the pitch long and thin,
yeah,
right? That means that it's going to be easier for me to advance the ball this way than running roundwards. Or if I make the pitch short and wide, that will encourage me using the wings. Yeah. Or
yeah,
if I put a player off the side that I can pass the ball to, but he or she can't be tackled. Yeah. So condition games have been around for ages, and constraints, in part, not whole, in part, is like that. But the idea of using one of the interesting things that comes out of constraints is not using different shaped racket. For example, you get a kid of 4 or 5 trying to play with a full weight basketball. It's a different game, isn't it? You
yeah,
know, but the idea of playing with different shaped implements and that's great, but only after you've got a basis. So this is the point for me, that I would start with some basics, and then once the younger performer has those fundamentals, then I'd move on. I would start teaching judo with breakfalls. You know, that makes sense to me. I want them to be safe. I want them to have confidence so they don't mind falling. And
So
away I go.
can I ask you one question about that? So
Please.
if you were teaching judo break falls, would it make more sense to teach the break fall like as part of the throw, or do you think it would make sense to do the break fall separately? Have people learn like the movement of the break fall where they do it for X amount of reps, and then do the break fall in the context of somebody throwing them, and
What
then
is
take
the
it to,
answer? What is the answer to any question anybody ever
it
asks me?
depends, right?
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're too sharp. You're too sharp, Josh. But it does depend.
Yeah.
Most of the time, yeah, especially with younger performers, I'd teach the break fall first, and then we'd play all sorts of games. Yeah,
Right.
because if I don't teach the break fall first, they'll either get hurt the first time someone does an Ippon Seoinage or whatever, or they'll be so tense that they'll hurt themselves and it won't work. So
Right.
that was fine. If, however, I've got someone who's a bit more confident and a bit athletic, and they've got a good movement vocabulary, they've got a good background, I can teach the whole thing. Yeah,
Right.
and away I go. Yeah,
Okay.
and there are a lot of terms that come out of. There used to be a lot of terms that came out of the cognitive approach, which have been shown to be too mechanist. They were too mechanical. They were too computer-like, and we talk about that in the book.
Yeah.
And thank goodness we've moved beyond that. But there are now too many terms in eco that are very sketchy as to how that might work. So I think this is why I've gone with the combination approaches. So
Yeah.
for example, you're coaching me. I'm going to fight this guy.
Okay.
What information would you give me as a coach about this fellow I'm going to fight?
It depends.
Very good. Now
Well, so
get
okay.
get off the fence, Vogel, and tell me what you tell me.
All right. So I think depending on your skill set, depending on your experience level, let's say you're an experienced jiu-jitsu person or a judo player, I would watch footage of this person. I would get a general sense of what their major attacks are. So they tend to play Osotogari, Uchimata, and then double
Yeah,
leg takedown. Right, that's
yeah,
their attack profile. And then they stand right leg forward usually, and they always grab with their right hand in cross collar grip. And I'd say, okay,
yeah. Okay,
Dave,
that's
this is
enough.
what you're.
Right,
Okay,
time out. That's enough. Okay, what you've just given me, the some research would call contextual priors.
yeah,
It's saying in this context, Dave, he does a lot of leg grabs. He does a lot of this. He prefers this stance. Watch him. Watch this. Watch this. And what that's done from a predictive processing point of view is I am. I think he's likely to do this.
yeah,
So if I'm weighting my attention, I'm ready for that, and I've sussed it out, and therefore, when it comes, I've already sussed out what I'm going to do, and I can react. Perception action coupling. Yeah.
yeah,
If, however, he does something else, I am now. I love this is good. The technical term. I'm surprised. Okay.
yeah,
So no S Sherlock. So now I have to think about stuff and come up with a new answer.
yeah,
Right. And that's the basis of predictive processing. So, which I think is great. It makes complete and utter sense that I would be weighting my attention towards certain things and surprised if someone did something else, and that would take me longer to think through. So if you're coaching me now, as opposed to preparing me to fight this bloke, what you're doing is you're giving me a set of counters, or you're challenging me by going, fight this sort of guy. And then for me, you debrief me and say, okay, so what was he doing? I had real trouble here. Very good. Now, how about this? How about this? How about this? Oh, okay. So now I can experiment. So now all of a sudden, because you've given me a few ideas, the Eco D approach, the experimental, let me try, is great. Absolutely perfect.
yeah,
So away we go. Yeah. So all of a sudden now you're coaching in a series of steps. Yeah. That expands my adaptability, encourages me to think for myself. But when I can't, I'm too knackered, or I'm fighting someone who's too technically good, you give me some hints. So it's this combination approach again: cognitive, ego D, and predictive processing. Bottom line for me, Josh, understanding. I think the fighter's understanding as to what he or she is trying to do, as opposed to what they're trying to do to you, is key. And as
Yeah.
soon as I got that, I'm flying.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. I mean, I think that kind of, the it depends idea sort of hits, like, I think the thing that I really enjoy about your book and about the interviews that I've listened to you have on different podcasts is I'm always drawn to question marks, because in this kind of field, I'm sure you've noticed on, Twitter, whatever, all these
Mhm.
conversations, there's a lot of people that sound very, very certain about this is how it is. Like, perception is direct, I know it, or perception is indirect, I know it. Um, and this is the way that you have to train, and this is the future of sport training. And to me, all that certainty seems, um, it seems to be a bit much, because, like, I can't think of anything in life where people who are experts in something agree, right? So if we're talking about a theoretical framework like predictive processing, for example, there's a lot of smart people that are studying this stuff, but I guarantee not all of them agree on this. So
No.
if all these smart people don't agree, then how certain, as I a coach, as how certain me being a coach can I be in this subject? Like, how confidently can I speak about it if all these smart people that know way more than I do don't even agree on it? And so I think,
Let me try this. I
yeah,
think the smartest people I've ever worked with will see agreement. I think the people who will go, there is only one way, are not so smart, but they're generally selling you something.
okay,
Now, I realize I'm an old cynic. Fair enough, mea culpa. All right, but I when I see the people who are absolutely like this,
yeah,
they're generally trying to sell you something.
yeah,
And we've done. uh, had a couple of guys came out with a paper about Bruce Lee and said how Bruce Lee was into ecological dynamics, and it was called "Being Water," which is a quote from Bruce. Yeah, and we did a response to it, quoting Musashi. You know Miyamoto Sword Saint
yeah.
Kensei.
Book of Five Rings.
Yeah, exactly right. And because the guys who wrote the Being Water paper and said that Bruce Lee never trained he never did like traditional training. He didn't do this. He didn't do that, and
He
he
did Wing
was he
Chun.
was just flowing. But of course, he bloody did. He
Yeah,
spent n years of his life drilling on a wooden man. He spent years of his life doing forms. He spent, even when he was a seriously advanced form, he would still do forms. He'd still do unopposed, and it's just like you. My concern was that they had tweaked history to fit what they wanted to say. Yeah, so that Being Water, I thought, was closer to Passing Water. Now we wrote a response paper,
okay.
and in academics, that's what you do. Rather than meeting in the car park for a fight, you write a response paper.
I saw you caught
And
a little bit of heat for that too.
oh yeah, yeah, but I've never caught heat directly.
Yeah, just on
It's
Twitter.
always it's always over here or over here, and I'm going. But you had the perfect. Oh, I'm told they've accused me of lying, but they have the perfect opportunity, Josh. Academics works by if you write a paper, we write a response paper. You have the right of response,
Okay.
so respond. Because if we've got things wrong, if I've lied, point it out. You know, it's not. We're not talking about a street fight. We're
Well,
talking about a debate.
what were the things that they said that you lied about?
I don't know because I've never seen the pro. I've
Oh,
never
okay.
because I don't. I'm either not sad enough or not egotistical enough to charge round looking at different webinars and websites and stuff like that. I'm told by someone else that's what I don't know,
I got
and
you.
for the life of me, Josh, I don't know. What do they check? There's a famous quote from Bruce Lee: "I fear not the man who has learnt 1,000 kicks, but the man who's done one kick 1,000 times."
That's a
Yeah,
lot of reps.
a lot of reps. And that's what he said. But they changed it. They changed his quote. I'm
What
going,
what did they change it to?
they changed it to he's done 1,000 kicks. No, the point he was making was a really good point from any martial arts. I'm ex-military, tell by the lobotomy scar. We drill on stoppages so that if all of a sudden the thing stops going bang,
Yeah, you
we've
can
got
do
to
it automatically.
drill. We could automatically, exactly. I mean, there are things you'll do on a map like that,
Yeah.
and they occur because of drilling. Drilling is an important, not the only, but an important part of practice, isn't it? Because loads of people do it, and that's my concern. But the reason I am so professionally argumentative, Josh, is because I'm worried where people come out with a very compelling hard sell, which I feel, in my opinion, and in some of my colleagues' opinions, is inaccurate. So I ask questions. I don't go, that's nonsense, that's rubbish. I don't go onto someone else's webinar and say, they're lying about me. I just go, I'm really sorry, I don't think that's right.
How does
Let's
it
have a
work?
debate. Because an academic argument is all about, you know, sometimes people were saying the earth's flat. Some other bloke said, no, it isn't. Yeah. And if you said, no, it isn't, they used to burn you, which is probably a bit excessive. So someone got on a boat and went across and went, no, it isn't. Oh, great. It's experimentation. If you don't know the answer, find some studies and find it out. So I do, I, I understand people being passionate about what they do.
Hmm.
Josh, we're passionate about martial arts. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're passionate about what you do. You want to give your students the best possible service, and you're so passionate about it. You'll do these sorts of webinars and talk to silly old fat Englishmen about how things are working. Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
Then that's what we want. Let's have a debate. Let's have an open debate. But no, it's like this. It's like this. Whenever anybody ever says it's absolutely like this, I'm worried. Doesn't mean they're wrong, because I think direct perception, they're absolutely right. I'd love them to show me how it works.
Yeah.
I'd love to do EEG studies with people to see how it works, but I'm absolutely certain that it's the most, if I say the most parsimonious, do you know what I'm talking about? It's the best answer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Just
so that's the
straightforward. It's
most
right there.
that's the most parsimonious solution. I'm fine. Of course it is. Yeah, and is it better to allow people to discover solutions for themselves when they can? Yeah, it's great. This is another thing. Do you demonstrate when you're
Yeah.
teaching moves? Fine. Now people say you shouldn't demonstrate because you're suggesting that there's only one way of doing it. Well, I don't know, Josh. How tall are you?
5'8", 5'7",
Right. What do you weigh?
like 165
Okay,
pounds.
so I'm about 6'1", and I'm about 250 on a good day. All
Okay.
right. Okay. So when you demonstrate it, am I going to look like you? No. You know,
No.
I would. I mean, I wouldn't have looked like you at 11. So all I'm picking up from your demonstration is a rough idea, and
Yeah.
then I go and have a go myself. What's wrong with that?
Well,
And
so this
yet,
is
no, because they say that the coach is insisting on this is the way to do it. Of course they're not.
yeah. I wonder if that particular like one thing I sense about that particular line of thought is that maybe there's a streak of sort of anti-authoritarian, rebellious kind of personality stuff going on there, like where
Possible.
I mean, and not everybody's going to be the same with that, but like there does seem to be like a, like the coach, like, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 21 years. So when my students pay me to teach a class, like they pay me because I have a lot more experience than them and I have the luxury of doing this professionally full time. So like I can show them the rough idea of something that I know to be a pretty effective way to do something. And so I think maybe but then online in some of these discussions, I see sort of like the coach shouldn't be telling you stuff you should discover on your own. And like that, definitely does seem to be true sometimes, but then sometimes the tone of that discussion comes across more um, like, don't tell me what to do, Dad.
I mean, I have never, I've almost never seen someone who is coaching someone to say you have to move like this.
Yeah,
The only time I've seen it is in kata. Yeah, is someone
yeah,
saying good movement in kata looks like this. Now I wouldn't demonstrate it because, as my sensei will say, my kata is rubbish. But that's when someone's trying to say it's got to be really precise.
yeah,
But most of the time, it's like I coach weightlifting.
yeah,
If I say a clean, do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah,
Yeah. So from the floor, dunk, 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 stand up. Right.
yeah,
There is a mechanically perfect move where all of the force you're exerting is vertical.
yeah,
Right. Of course there is. As some Scots bloke said on Star Trek, you cannot change the laws of physics. The laws of physics say you want the maximum upward force, right?
yeah,
But we can't do a straight upward force because our knees get in the way. So what you do is you pull it into your shins, then you bring it round across your knees, and then you get underneath. So what you do is you do this sort of shape, right? So it's not a straight line, but you try and make the this way movements as small as possible.
right.
If you're taller and you do a snatch, which is where your leg arms are apart, the move that way is likely to be more. If you're smaller, it's likely to be less. But there's a principle that there's the perfect technique, but no one can do the perfect technique because the body gets in the way. So
Yeah,
what you do is you say, here are the principles of this technique, and then you let them play. But do you not show them the principles technique?
yeah. So that's I mean, to be fair, in jiu-jitsu, there are some people that are very highly prescriptive that are like, this is how it has to be done, and they kind of go overboard with like mechanical details of how precise it has to be done.
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. But I haven't seen many coaches in my life.
Yeah, not a lot of them.
Yeah, and they're generally they're generally bloody idiots. It's
Yeah,
it's rare that I mean and so I'm just going. Of course, there are skill templates. There is a correct-ish way to paddle a kayak. There is a correct-ish way to do a power clean. There is a correct-ish way to serve a tennis ball. But then it adjusts.
yeah,
And someone who is 5'8" will look different doing the move to someone who is 6 foot. And someone who is 160 is going to look different to someone who's 250. But the principles of the movement will be somewhat similar.
yeah. I think the most reasonable people that I've talked to that are sort of further onto the spectrum towards using an ecological style of training or constraints led, like mostly constraints led training, kind of give a little bit of leeway for like, if I'm going to show you a specific technique, it's just a general template. Maybe let me show you how to do the rough idea of how to do the clean a few times, just so you get the rough idea. Here are the stable points of it. This is kind of like, you got to do this, but you can
Hmm.
move your elbows a little bit this way or that
No,
way.
no, no. Mate, I
Yeah.
use constraints. I use
Yeah.
constraints. I use constraints when I coach to clean. I put skittles down, say, don't knock this over. Again, a simple one. When I'm teaching the squat, I get the person to face the wall, now do a squat. And if they go forwards, they bang their head, so they stay upright. And then I say, but then I question them and say, now, what did that make you do? We made me do da, da, da. Okay, what was your back like? Okay, that's all good form because look. So remember that. Imagine there's a wall in front of you now when you do it. Try it out. And I'll happily do that. The only thing I'll do in addition is talk about their understanding of why I said that. But otherwise, no, it's a great look. Constraints led approach is great in certain circumstances. You
Yeah.
know,
It's interesting
I
because,
mean, this is where I get a little bit frustrated. I'm not anti what they're saying.
mhm.
I'm just questioning some bits of what they're saying. Sometimes the more, and sometimes less. But I'm not anti. I'd be an idiot if I was. Yeah, I'd be an
Yeah.
idiot if I was subscribing to the idea that everything works in here and everything is very information processed. No, it's not so. It's clearly not so. And there's enough studies that show it's not so. But there are also some studies that show that teaching the constraints-led approach in certain circumstances isn't as good, or it's good in different ways. This is good for this sort of outcome. This is good for this outcome, and so on, and so on. And it frustrates me that we can't, you know, have a debate about it in exactly the same way as. So I trained as a strength conditioner.
Hmm.
Okay, you have to do 3 sets of 10, don't you?
It depends.
Well, of course you don't have to do 3 sets of 10. It depends on what you're trying to achieve,
Yeah.
and that's a nonsense. So there's a general set of rules that say, in general, more reps gives you this and less reps gives you that.
Yeah.
And, and then, the science becomes, I mean, they call it an art, but it's not. It's a sort of an informed art. But I've seen strength and conditioning coaches debate, argue, what's wrong? Fine, and agree to differ, or say, well, look, I do it this way, you do it that way, and these are the characteristics of the athlete that I'd look at if I was going to do this, this, this. That's fine.
Yeah.
Coaches will coach triple jump in different ways, shot put in different ways. Not a problem. It's just I don't know. Some people seem to get a little bit good old English expression. They get their knickers in a twist. And for me, I'm just going. I will question to the day
Yeah.
I die. Yeah, hopefully not too soon because the wife will kill me. But to the day I die, I will question absolutist statements from either direction because it doesn't make any sense. Because you can always go, what about this? What about that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, what you and I talked about earlier about maybe sometimes the gulf between theory and practice, all those shades of gray and all those things that happen when, like, for example, I'm a jiu-jitsu coach. I own my own gym with my wife. And there are certain things that as a gym owner, I have to look at differently than I do as an instructor, as a practitioner. And these are all different hats that I wear. And so the it depends idea really is very, very true in that, there are times where I'm teaching a class and as a business owner, it makes sense for me to maybe demonstrate a technique a few times because there are new students in the class that might not feel comfortable. And I want them to build a certain amount of rapport with their training partners before they do live work. Whereas if I was just only focusing on skill development, I might do things in a certain way. For a competition class, it would be different. And so there's all these, like, there's so many shades of gray to it. And I think maybe the theory and practice thing is if I was just looking at it from only a theoretical perspective, it might be hard to see some of those shades of gray that
See,
change the
try
way.
this. Let me. What you've just described, I'm absolutely 100% with. Have you heard the term biopsychosocial?
Yes.
Fine. So let's say let's change biopsychosocial into like a psychological bit. So
Yeah.
the bio bit is psychomotor. It's how you learn to control the movement. And then the psycho bit is psychobehavioral. It's what motivates you, what makes you confident, what makes you feel good about yourself. And
Yeah.
the social bit is psychosocial. It's how you get on with the people. Now, you will run a class with an eye on psychomotor, psychobehavioral, and psychosocial characteristics.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
won't just make decisions on a psychomotor basis. So it depends.
Yeah.
Straight away, it depends. What's the problem?
Yeah. I think that's kind of maybe I've had this discussion with a few of my friends who are very much into like how you and I talked earlier about how sometimes you get an idea in your head and you fall in love with the idea, and it's hard to see outside of the idea. I think that there's some people that I've talked to who are good coaches and they're good people and they're very smart. And I disagree with them about the idea that, like, they've said to me that the the most important thing in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school is skill development. And the point that I've come back to them with is that, like, well, that is sometimes true, but for example, the social part of what you just said, there are certain instances where it's more important that I develop a social, cultural kind of thing in the school. And that makes the skill development easier in some ways, but that means that just purely becoming skillful in the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu isn't always the number one thing. It's just one piece of the larger puzzle. And
Yeah.
sometimes that puzzle,
Am I coaching a young child who's come to have fun in this class?
yeah,
Am I coaching a 45-year-old person who wants to feel better about themselves, get a bit of confidence? Am I coaching a future world champion?
yeah,
And wouldn't I coach them in different ways? Of course I bloody would. Get real, yeah? And could I use more discovery methods, more eco methods with the potential world champions? Damn right. Once they've got that vocabulary, of course I could. Of course I could. But the idea that there is the only one way, the idea that you shouldn't do unopposed practice. We're just we've just written a response paper to some guys who said you shouldn't do unopposed practice, or if you do unopposed practice, you should be like this. You know, people who say there's no use for imagery because there's no such thing as an internal representation. Of course, there's an internal representation. Don't be dull. Of course, there is.
yeah.
How many world class performers across the board use imagery? To turn around and say it doesn't work, oh please.
Yeah, I mean that's a point that I think, as a coach, there are certain things that when people say stuff like that, that just doesn't match my experience at all. And like I use imagery pretty heavily, like when I'm preparing for tournaments and things like that for myself. And so I guess that's where it's kind of easy to get lost in you can have very credible people, very educated people saying something like that. And as a coach, I can say, well, that's not at all what I experience. And, visualization and internal imagery and all that
And
stuff really,
shouldn't they listen? Shouldn't
well, I would
those
think, yeah.
educated people listen? You know, you see, was it the 13-second knockdown by
Conor
oh
McGregor.
yeah, and he said, "I'm going to do this." He
Yeah.
practiced it for 4 months. He's doing it in the warm-up room. Now, there's a perfect example, Josh, of predictive processing. I am waiting. I'm going to give this bloke this move, and I'm going to give him that opening because I know that when I give him that opening, I can counter him like this.
Yeah.
I've practiced it in advance. We've decided on it in advance, and I've set it up. So perception action, right? But not even perception action, because it's not just perception. I'm going to give him the go. Go on, have a go. Here it is. Take this. Mate. No. Um, and to turn around and say that that wasn't driven by internal representation.
And what was
No.
interesting about that example is that goes back to your psychomotor social thing that you were talking about, where before that, Conor McGregor for months had been harassing this guy and like talking trash to him and in all these
Yeah.
interviews and getting him really emotionally worked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you have this whole, like, it's not just, a mechanical battle between Conor McGregor versus this guy. There's the emotional part of it where this guy's getting worked up and he's like, I can't believe this guy's saying stuff like this to me. I'm going to kill him. And then when the match finally happens, there's all that pent up emotional stuff that makes you behave a certain way, that makes you maybe predictable. And then Conor McGregor had a well worked out solution for that problem.
And you see that lots.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, another thing. Do I drill? Yes, I drilled in the military for weapons. I'm a tech diver, big deep stuff.
Mhm.
Am I dry drilling? Am I running through things? Yes, just like when I used to do free fall. I'm dry drilling. I'm running through things and saying, if this happens, I'm going to do this. If that happens, I'm going to do that. Of course I am. there's so much good practice that people poo-poo, and it's just like, anyway. Look, what you want to do. I mean, it's just all you. What I want ideally is for people who watch this, people in your students, your colleagues, to be credulous, skeptical, and
Yeah.
have a listen and go, oh, that makes sense. But I don't think he's right there. That's okay. Come back with questions. Not a problem. You'll have to talk to me again, Josh.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, this is all a lot of great food for thought. And, I think that it's so interesting because there's just coaching is such a complicated, well, maybe not complicated, but there's such a rich field of tools to use in coaching,
Yeah.
and it's such a
Yeah.
nuanced thing, and people are so
Yes.
different from each other.
Yeah.
And like you said, a kid's program for brand new kids might be different than a world class black belt jiu-jitsu person's
Hmm.
program might be. Um, and so, like the book that you wrote with Dr. Taylor, um, if you were a Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach who didn't have a strong academic background and stuff, do you feel like the book that you guys wrote is kind of a good entry point into this discussion?
We hope so, Josh. I
Yeah.
mean, actually, Jamie's into his jiu-jitsu.
Oh, very cool.
Oh, no, no, no. He's an ex. I mean, you always know most rugby players and judo players got bad ears.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
he was a hooker, which is not a profession; it's a position in the middle of the scrum. But it does tend to get your ears very rubbed. But now
Yeah.
he's into jiu-jitsu. No, I mean, he's really into that.
Oh, very
But
cool.
no, no, it's we would hope so. I mean, I hope, Josh, you found it understandable and clear. We're trying, we don't want to make things complicated. We
Yeah. I
want
mean,
to
I
make
definitely
things
find it very clear.
good, good.
Yeah. It's clear, and I think the thing that I like about it is that, again, I keep on coming back to this like uncertainty thing, and in a subject matter that there's so many confident, certain voices speaking on. I think that your book does a really good job of explaining different theoretical perspectives, how they mix, maybe the history of why some of them are opposing each other. But it's all in a very easy to understand, pretty clear. Like, I'm a layman, so I can understand it well enough to get something out of it, and
Good.
maybe start asking more nuanced, thoughtful questions when I dig deeper
Which
into
is
this.
okay. I mean, that's music to my ears, Josh. Thank you, because
Mhm.
that's why we wrote it. I mean, we didn't write it for us. We wrote it for people to find useful. So I'm very, that's great, mate. Great, absolutely super.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you guys. You mind if I ask you one more question?
One more, go for it.
Okay. So, for just coaches that don't have an academic background who are interested in digging into the science of all this kind of stuff, what are some, like, what are some simple tips for reading a study, reading a paper, digging into the science, and seeing and understanding which are strong studies, and like how do you
You're
tell which
probably
is the
right.
good stuff and which is not good
Okay.
stuff?
There are there's a sort of it's a difficult question, Josh.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to sort of give you a set of rules that says a decent paper will be like this. For example, there's a really, you've heard of Nature. Nature's like the top. It's well up there. It's above Mad Magazine in terms of academic credibility.
Okay.
And Nature ran years ago. It ran a study that showed that learning styles didn't work,
Okay.
and yet I think there was a study last year that showed that 85% of teachers in England still believe in learning styles.
Okay.
So it's almost like you can you know how many psychologists did it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb really got to want to change. And it's
Okay.
honestly, my hint would be to read widely, to read stuff that makes things simple where it can,
Okay.
and to test to test it against your own understanding, but then to test it with your peer. I'm a psychologist. We do a thing called peer supervision. So I
Okay.
will talk to one of my guys, someone else, a colleague, not even a colleague, and say, check my arithmetic on this. What do you think of this? And I've always been like that. I was in the military. Test me out. This is a plan. What do you think? Is that nonsense or what? Um, and I think it's good to talk. Sit down and talk. So if you have a bunch of other instructors, and some of them think this and some of them think that, that's great. And so long as they don't start abusing you on Twitter, you'll be all right, won't you? And that's let's just it's all right to disagree. This is the interesting thing. I'm a psychologist mostly,
Okay.
and a lot of the work I've done has looked at what is a high performing environment. And
Okay.
a high performing environment is characterized by quality disagreement. And if you want the technical term for it, it's the ZOUD. You live life in the zone of uncomfortable debate. You're
Okay.
happy to talk back and forth. You're happy to disagree. That's okay. You're happy to keep thinking about it. Mega. Really, really good. And so all the high performing environments I've ever worked in and had the pleasure of working with, they disagree well.
Oh, okay. All right. That's a great
So
tidbit. Yeah.
yeah. So do that. Live life in the ZOUD.
Okay. All right. I think that's kind of a natural, a good way to wind down with this. So Dave, where are some places, just as we finish up, where are some places that people should look for you online?
Oh gosh, I'm not a probably finding anybody who's got the tolerance and the foolishness to ask me. I honestly, Josh, I'll talk to anybody. I don't mind. I'll go. There are a couple of people who are I I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't go on their webinar because I don't trust them.
Okay.
I don't respect them. I don't trust them. But the vast majority of people, I mean, I've done some. Interestingly, I've done some with police firearms instructors. I've done stuff in special forces. I've done stuff in rugby coach. It's all right. So and if from this, if there were other out there in martial arts world, I'd be very very happy to. It's but I think it's virtually impossible to get a message across in however many characters X allows you, 280 characters, whatever.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get a message across in an hour. I've thrown ideas at you, and you've been extremely tolerant, and you've allowed me to witter on.
I mean, I'm grateful
Much
for your
better.
time.
Oh gosh, no, thank you. But much better to read it and reflect on it and come back.
Yeah.
So that's where that for me is get hold of a book, generally books because the papers can be quite narrow and specific, and you
Okay.
want a general overview. But do that. Okay,
Okay. All right, Dave. Well, I appreciate your time, and
it's an absolute pleasure, sir.
all right, brother.
And when
Well,
I come to Philadelphia, I'll look you up, but I won't go on a map. I've got metal knees now. You kill me.
well, come visit. It would be fun to like catch up with you, grab a cup of coffee, and talk shop.
We can do that. No problem. Have a good night.
All right, you too. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
All right, bye.